background on Adam Lewberg, our speaker today. He is the president of Postal Advocate. We are the only mail audit and recovery firm in the U.S. and Canada. We manage a portfolio of 134,000 pieces of mailing equipment for the largest U.S. companies. He speaks and teaches nationally on mail savings and industry trends. He was the industry co-chair for the Boston Postal Customer Council and the Mailing Systems Management Association member. He has certifications in CMDSS and MDC. He is a featured writer for the Mailing Systems Technology magazine, and he also worked for one of the largest mailing vendors for over 17 years as the director of national sales for pre-sort, tabletop inserters, addressing hardware and software, and green offerings. He was one of the top 5 account managers nationally working with some of the nation's top accounts. Postal Advocate is not affiliated with any mailing vendor, so we offer unbiased advice. Over to you, Adam.
Thank you, Doris. So today we're going to talk about, let me back up. We focus solely on helping large organizations manage their mail spends. And our goal today is to share what we've learned in those experiences and share them with you, so hopefully you can reduce your mailing costs and make your life easier around this category. So what we're going to cover today, we're going to cover equipment savings process. How do you reduce the cost of your mailing equipment? How do you get any visibility? And in order to be able to really control a category, you need this sort of visibility. Choosing the right vendor and acquisition method. We'll tell you what vendors are available and what things you should consider. Choosing the right solutions. Once you've selected that vendor, there are going to be different requirements basically on a site-by-site basis. We're going to be giving you some things to think about when you're looking at equipment so you can make the right decisions. PC postage, especially around the enterprise side, is one of the fastest growing areas of the mail category. We've implemented a lot of these for our clients. We strongly recommend that PC postage is a play inside your mailing portfolios, and we'll give you reasons why as we go through this. Eliminating fees and vendor charges and overages and things like that. We have found millions of dollars in fees and overages for our clients. We're going to show you what things you can look for and how you can reduce this and make it easier. Lost postage. We find that as people return meters, they forget in many cases to go back and collect the postage that's in the meter. We're going to give you some tools of how you can figure that stuff out and get that money back. Enterprise fleet management. How do you manage your fleet to make it easy for the future, and how do you find, in that case, then postage savings inside your fleet? And then what are some best-in-class tools and resources that you can use? So the equipment savings process. We do this for all of our accounts. You can do this yourself. This is the standard process that we do in every account. 1, we need to gain visibility to your equipment and spends. So do you have the visibility to make the right decisions? In many cases, we find clients don't. They don't know the inventory, when leases expire, postage spends, mail breakdowns. They just don't have that level of detail to make good decisions. Very important to get that, and we'll go over that in a couple slides. Validate questionable charges. We find that a lot of times, especially in larger organizations, as the invoice goes to accounts payable to pay, that person in accounts payable who's reviewing the invoice doesn't necessarily know what they're checking off against and just pays it. So we find that there's a lot of questionable charges on bills that if you're not checking them against, what an original contract was, what, the actual usage levels were, that you find a lot of errors. Negotiate enterprise pricing and terms. So we find that a lot of organizations will be spending, $100 a month for model X and $250 at another location for the same model in the same company because there's no standardized pricing and terms. Then, is there a process to work with with the locations on equipment changes, eliminating the fees, maintaining the postage balances and then claiming the lost funds, and then a continual review of this process to ensure savings. By doing this, we find for our clients 30 to 70% savings. The savings are out there. It's just this process that needs to be followed. The biggest thing that comes up for clients is we find very few organizations have good visibility to their mailing spends. And what I mean by that is they just don't know where all their stuff is. They don't know the details of the equipment that they have. They don't know the postage spends. And it used to not be that big of a deal for customers because everything inevitably, like from a financial reporting standpoint, you'd ask companies and you'd say, do you know where all your equipment is? And they'd say, no, but sooner or later it's going to hit the income statement and as an expense, and that's sufficient for us. The IRS changed that last year. They put in these new financial accounting standards boards, the FASB boards, put in these new rules about leases. The majority of mailing equipment out there is leased. And they put in these rules that said every company needs to start recording their leases on their balance sheet as a future liability. So where it used to be, like I was saying, you just cared that you were spending $5,000 a year on your mailing machine lease, it hit through the income statement. Now that $5,000 that you owe for the next 3 years, because you have 3 years remaining on that lease, is $15,000 of future lease obligation. That has to be recorded on the balance sheet as a liability. Public companies had to adhere to this 12, 15, 18. Non-public companies are starting at the end of this year, and it's required a lot of our clients to basically need a higher level of visibility in all their equipment. So they need to get the details of where all their equipment is throughout the country so they can find these leases. So we've been there to help the clients for that. But if you haven't developed this process yet, or you don't have this level of visibility, it's going to be required, whether you're public or non-public, to manage these sort of leases. The core things that you want to know is on your equipment inventory, you want to know your models, serial numbers, descriptions, install dates. For leases, you want to know your contract terms, contract number, term, amount, items covered, end of lease dates. Postage spends, we recommend knowing how much postage every site does and what are the balances sitting in prepaid accounts. Are there different fees for meter rentals, maintenance, rate changes, supplies, and then what are the fees that you're spending? So the more you can control this visibility, the more you can maintain saving strategies. So how do you get that level of visibility? So we found sort of a standard way. There's the two schools of thought. One school of thought is we're going to go to the locations and we're going to ask them what they have for equipment, and we're going to get them to send us copies of invoices and that sort of thing. It just doesn't work in large organizations. It's incredibly onerous to get that sort of process done. So we found a simpler way that we implement for our clients. So we say, can the vendor produce any reports of the stuff they already know for you? So do you have a relationship with one of the main mailing vendors? Can they produce reports for you? So, and on those reports, you're hoping that you get account numbers. And most accounts are going to have 3 to 4 different account numbers per location, an installation account number, a lease number, 1 or 2 postage accounts. The lease details, very important for the FASB requirements, the rate, term, end of lease dates, and item covered. Meter rental and maintenance agreements, model and serial numbers, and descriptions of every item. Whatever you can't get from the vendors, because they didn't even know that certain locations were even part of your organization, what we do is we go to accounts payable and we say, can you request the mailing spends from the core mailing vendors, Pitney Bowes, Neopost, Hassler, Francotype, Postalia, and they operate under some slightly different company names. Like Neopost might run under Neopost, Mail Finance, Hassler, and so you have to pull those things together. Then from the data you get in accounts payable, the stuff that doesn't match the vendor reports that you got, you basically pull together in one way, and then you ask for copies of a few PDFs of the actual invoices so you can get those numbers. Then all that information gets entered online on the vendor's website, and from the vendor's website you can collect the full level of detail. We recommend that there's a process to do this, whether it's monthly or every half year, but there's some process for updating this information. Consider postal accounting systems that provide transaction details of the mailing, so you can see who are the biggest mailers, what classes of mailer they're doing. This is going to be important in a few slides as we talk about postage savings. How do you save money in actual postage? Find the active locations with equipment and then set up a schedule for continual review. So it sounds onerous, but once you've done it once or twice, this process becomes relatively simple, and it's just adding a few exceptions. But it's getting control of this that's very important and is the number one way to save money on this equipment. Choose the right mailing equipment vendor and acquisition method. So luckily in this space, on the core mailing machines and low-end inserters, and there isn't that many providers. There's Pitney Bowes, Neopost, Hassler, who's owned by Neopost, FP, which is Francotype Postalia, DataPack, and Stamps.com. Stamps.com is only PC postage today. So you want to compare the vendors on what sort of models and features and specifications they have. Will the models they have work for your locations? Do they provide good service support in your area? And it's good to ask for references. Are they easy to do business? Do they get you the quotes quickly? Do they respond to the RFPs timely? Do they, answer your questions well? And then what's their total cost of ownership lease? So what I mean by that is when you factor in the fees, the equipment costs, purchase, lease, rentals, maintenance, and everything that comes together, what ends up being the best solution for you? Now, once you've sort of decided on a vendor, it's important to think about what is your right acquisition method. So historically, people have just kind of leased this stuff, and they've just said, look, we're going to lease all of our equipment. But the question is that the best idea? So leases make sense in some cases, but the three options you can do is you can purchase the equipment and then rent the meters and pay maintenance charges and things like that. You can lease it, which are usually all-inclusive agreements, or you can rent. And the only things you can typically rent are the low-end systems. We typically try to push our clients that for the lowest end equipment, try to be on rentals. And the main reason for that is that it keeps you. Leases are typically a long-term commitment, usually 3 to 5 years. Rentals can sometimes be shorter terms. But the bigger thing is if you need to terminate a rental, in many cases it's significantly less expensive than if you need to terminate a lease. In many cases there's now a premium and in some cases a savings on doing a rental over a lease. So on the low end, which usually makes up a good chunk of companies' fleets of equipment, we try to push people to rentals. And then on the medium to high end, it's a question of purchase versus lease. This equipment lasts a long period of time, certainly longer than a 3 to 5 year lease horizon. So it's the question of if you want to get the full utilization of it and you have capital, purchasing is a great option. Otherwise, leasing is something to consider. But it's important to run the numbers in these different ways to see what's a better financial decision for you, because the financing costs of mailing equipment can be extremely high. Choose the right solution. So we're going to talk about mailing machines, postage meters here. There's other guides that we have on our blog, postaladvocate.com/blog, where you can learn the same sort of detail on inserters, addressing systems, envelope printers, mail automation software, tracking systems, shipping systems, PC postage, all the core mail categories that you might need to look at. But mailing systems, postage meters, and mail machines are the most common thing that's in every organization. So we're going to break this down into a little bit more detail. Oftentimes the vendors try to make this a really quick decision, like, you're spending a certain amount per month today, you can get a new system that's just like it, and it's, maybe 10% less, and that's a simple decision. What we find is when you go through this level of detail of what are the core functions of the equipment, that you can save significantly higher. We, on average, save our clients 60% in this category. 2/3 of that is from right sizing, getting people who have bigger machines but do, frankly, lower volumes of postage. And when we go through the features of what these machines have, they realize, I just don't need all those features. It doesn't make sense for me to have an automatic feed mailing system when I only do $100 a month in postage, which is 10 pieces a day. I don't need something that runs 70 letters or 100 letters a minute. So when we're looking at, the number one question is there is speed of units. That's the number one differentiator between mailing equipment. Low-end equipment typically is in the 15 to 45 letters a minute. Mid-range machines are 50 to 180, and then high-end machines are 70 to 310 letters per minute. So then the question is, how do they feed? Low-end machines feed by hand. You feed them one at a time. High-end machines typically have automatic feeders. Sealing is included in mid to high-end systems. On the low-end systems, it's an option. So do you need the system to seal? The tape mechanism. So if you're running oversized pieces that are too big to run through the machine, you need to print a meter tape. Low-end systems are going to use like a postcard-sized tape that you run through like an envelope. Mid-sized machines will have tape dispensers that are like individually cut tape strips. And higher-end machines may have roll tape mechanisms that are much less expensive on a per-tape basis. Scales. Do you need heavy capacity scales? This is one of the biggest areas of overspending. We'll find lots of times clients have 15, 30, 70, 149 pound scales on their mail machines that are incredibly expensive. You can go to your office supply store and for $100 you can buy a 100-pound electronic scale. With the mailing vendors, when you buy a 30, 70, 149 pound scale, it might be $2,500 to $4,000 for that extra capacity scale. So the majority of times where you need the mailing scale is for the first couple pounds. So we try to keep clients usually in 5 or 10 pound scales where possible. Weighing systems. Mid to high-end scales may have internal weighing systems. So if you have a mixed pile of mail, you can run them through at once, and it will weigh the pieces as they go through. This is an expensive option. If you do lower volume mail or everything's the same size, that's a premium you shouldn't be paying for. Postage accounting systems. Do you need to break down the mail by department? How many departments? Do you need the detail of every transaction? Do you need to print anything else? Do you need to print meter ads or endorsements or custom graphics or barcodes? Do you have the space for the machine? Some machines are huge, and you need to make sure that you can fit it in your organization. And what should you expect for the cost for ink and tape and sealing solution in some cases if you want to use the vendor's sealing solution? But you can see the difference in pricing that these different groups make up. $25 to $125 a month in the low, $125 to $500 in the mid, and over $500. In the high range, you could be $500 to $1,500 a month for a machine. So it can make a huge difference by speccing machines the right way. PC postage. This is the fastest growth area in the mailing market. So what PC postage is instead of having to have a postage meter in your office to do mail, you would go to a website, log into one of the vendors that offers PC postage, and print out either stamps on a stamp sheet, which is the most common. Like you see this picture, the vendors would provide you sheets of stamps that are serialized, and you would print directly onto these sheets. You could get a thermal label printer from the vendors, and they could print the stamps right onto a thermal label. You could print directly onto an envelope, or you could print on a 4x6 shipping label, usually to do priority mail packages as an example. So the beauty of PC postage is over postage meters is the first is there's no hardware. It comes with a scale that's basically a disposable item. If you want a label printer, you can get it. We don't find that label printers are that common. Maybe only 10-20% of the locations are going to have label printers. Most people are going to just use their local printers. It is amazing accounting tools. So with a postage meter, you filled for $1,000 of postage on this date, and that's kind of all you know unless you have an elaborate accounting system. With PC postage, every single piece of mail, who generated it, the date it was, the class it was, the cost center that it was associated to, and you have that throughout history. So it's much greater detail. And by having that detail, we find that there's less potential for theft. There isn't just a mail machine sitting idle that people can run their stuff through. It is a unit someone has to log into to use. They're much less apt to run personal mail on it or have a cleaning crew that might run it at the end of the day when no one's watching the machine. It's less expensive. PC postage subscriptions are run between $10 and $30 a month per license with short commitment periods. So you're not signing up for 3 to 5 year leases. Usually it's 12 months, and some enterprise agreements might even be more flexible. But most important, there are postage discounts available through PC postage that are not available through postage meters. So if you look at letter mail, there was a nice discount that went into stamps, this year, that if you use a postage meter or PC postage, you got a 5-cent discount on stamps. But if you look at the categories in yellow, these are categories where PC postage has a lower rate than postage meters. Certified mail gets the electronic return receipt service that saves, it's actually $1.20. It's a typo, I apologize. It's $1.20 per piece over the manual green card return receipt. You can get the electronic return receipt service through postage meters, but it's an additional option, and only some meters have it, and it doesn't give you the same level of tracking because it doesn't have the address connected to the piece. If you're sending out first-class parcels, you save 25 to 28% over meters. If you're sending out, it's 28 to 55% savings. If you're sending priority mail, it's 4 to 40% savings. If you're sending express mail, it's 11 to 13% savings. So these package savings, and the reason you get these sort of package savings is because you're able to submit the entire address with the item to the Postal Service. So if you look at this 4x6 label here, when you're submitting a priority mail piece or a certified piece or an express or first-class parcel, you're generating a 4x6 label that has the destination address, return address, tracking barcode, and postage amount all in one is being submitted to the Postal Service. That allows the post office an easier method of tracking and reporting, similar to what the private carriers offer. And in exchange for that, they give you better discounts. The drawback of PC postage is it's not designed for high volume weighing, feeding, and sealing applications where mail systems shine. So if you're doing $1,000 a month in postage and you run your bills through it and you need something that seals and feeds the envelopes at fast speeds, you're certainly going to want to have a mailing machine or postage meter for that application. If you're doing low volume applications where you're doing, $50, $100, a couple $100 a month in postage, PC postage is a great fit for that, and can make it easier to manage across the enterprise. Vendor fees. We find accounts, many accounts, the majority of accounts we go to are spending in the tens of thousands of dollars a year in vendor fees and overcharges unknowingly. And so we're going to talk about what those fees are and how you avoid them. So if you look at this chart, the most common fees that people pay are refill fees to add money to their meter. It might be up to $20 each time. They might pay an advance fee up to 1% to borrow funds from the vendor. They might pay finance charges 15 to 20+% on postage that's running and accruing in like a credit card. They might pay an over-limit fee, an annual rewards fee, lease late fees, insurance fees on leases because no one ever sent a proof of insurance certificate. Overcharges we find because invoices are not getting the national account agreement. There's some sort of national contract that's in place, but a specific location is not attached to that and getting those discounts. There might be meter maintenance and rate changes that are included on a lease, on an all-inclusive invoice, but are also being billed separately. There could be equipment bills for closed sites that they're still getting invoiced, resets and advance charges that should have been included, loyalty points that go unredeemed. We've found, to prove this point, we found 5,325 transactions of fees and overcharges we've gotten canceled or credited for our clients for over $10 million. Like, this isn't a made-up thing. This happens all the time. So the strategies that we recommend to fix this, and this is going to sound stupid, pay bills on time, right? And you say, well, obviously we want to pay bills on time. The payable terms for mailing equipment, and especially around postage, might be 27, 28 days paid in full, not the day you mail it, the day the vendor receives it. So it's very important to pay attention to those. When you're getting hit with 20% plus finance charges on postage because you're not paying bills in the 20-day period that they're due and in full, it adds up just like a credit card would be that you don't pay in full. Look at each invoice and validate all the chargeable items. Do you know what you're being invoiced for? We recommend canceling vendor equipment insurance. Most people have insurance on their premise, but the vendors require that you need to provide that proof of insurance certificates, which most clients never do, and they pay vendor insurance unknowingly. There's loyalty programs that in some cases are chargeable or may have points accruing that people don't redeem. And make sure your postage refill and advance charges are included in agreements, but then monitored. And these are some of the core ways that you can get rid of these costs. But I'm saying they're out there. $10 million proves it. Lost postage recovery. So we found another $6 million in lost postage for our clients sitting in dormant accounts. Plus, we buy the databases from the state's unclaimed funds offices. And on any of the mailing vendors that turn over funds, we have a database now of 49,000 transactions of postage funds turned over to the states from the mailing vendors. And this happens because, if you think about it, an office closes, merges, doesn't mail as much anymore, switches vendors, so they were using one vendor, now they use another. So someone turns in the equipment. There's that postage meter or that mail machine is a bank. It holds funds. That's what it's designed to do. It holds funds. People think when they send the money in that they sort of expense those funds. But there's money sitting in there. And there could be money sitting in the meter itself, and there could be money sitting in a postage funding account, either a prepaid funding account that you use to fund that meter, or even an advance account that you are borrowing funds for that now has a credit. So very infrequently do we find that clients, when they turn meters in, basically go to the vendor's website, understand what balance they had, what account number they had, go to the vendor's website, fill out the postage refund request form, and document that they got all those funds back. And this is the reason for this type of loss. So the steps to find this money is find all the account numbers you had in current and past meters. Enter these account numbers on the vendor's website to see if there's any data available. Do they still show any active information? Contact the meter vendors directly to figure out, are there funds sitting in those accounts? And then check the unclaimed funds databases to see if these funds were turned in. So this is on the meter side. The same process holds true if you had permit accounts, business reply accounts, postage due accounts, permit imprint accounts with the post office. That money gets lost and it never gets turned over to the states as unclaimed property. If you need help in this, we can help you research to see if there's funds available. And we find most organizations at some point have lost postage. Sometimes it's small, insignificant amounts, and sometimes it's in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. It just ranges on the account. But everybody likes found money, so this can be a fun one. Enterprise fleet management. So now that you've sort of got the visibility, these are the strategies that we recommend as far as maintaining your account. Like, what are the best-in-class strategies that we try to implement with our accounts that you can do yourself? So first off, have a current master service agreement with one or two mailing vendors. So we find that lots of accounts at one point might have had a master service agreement, but today that's expired years ago and they're just sort of on a contract-by-contract basis with no sort of terms and conditions that benefit them. We believe that every larger organization should have a master service agreement with defined pricing and terms that benefit them for the future, so that all of your organizations can be linked to those processes. And it makes sure that your sites, when they're signing an agreement, it's the terms and conditions that represent your organization at the right pricing. Develop equipment standards that can be followed through your locations. So make sure if corporate can put out that, look, we use PC postage for our low volume sites. If you want something else, it goes by exception, or this is the recommended solutions for these types of volumes, and then that can be implemented throughout the organization. It can drive huge savings. Define what review process for renewals to ensure that locations are not being oversold. Most organizations, prior to us working with them, rely on the vendors to basically work with the locations and help them set the requirements and figure out what they need. Oftentimes we find that locations are being oversold. They're being sold bigger equipment than they necessarily need. They're not given the options to lower end equipment for them to make informed decisions. And that's one of the main reasons why we average 60% savings in this category, is because that process isn't being done correctly, in their organization. Request national billing support. So very few clients that you'll go to ever have a positive thing to say about mailing equipment vendor billing, because there's so many different things that you need to pay for. You need to pay for the equipment. There might be different fee charges, meter rentals, maintenance, one or two different postage accounts that they have to manage. And this gets multiplied if you have 10, 20, 50, 100, thousands of locations. This gets multiplied incredibly. So we recommend that you need someone to go to, so you're not just dialing the 800 number of the vendor, to do things like, change names, assignment and assumption, request bills in certain formats. So it's great to request a billing support manager from your vendors. Consolidate equipment and postage into centralized schedules, which we find eliminates a lot of fees and confusion. So we find a lot of organizations, prior to us working with them, have where they're being billed, each site gets their own bill, or maybe a small group gets billed together and then everybody else gets billed randomly. The problem with that is by the time the bills get to accounts payable and they get approved and they get paid, they're late. So one of the best-in-class strategies is to try to get consolidated billing and consolidate where all your leases are billed together on one account, or all your postage accounts are billed together on one postage funding account. And can those be exported into an Excel format with your cost centers on it so they can be easy to review and pay? And then define a postage payment strategy that minimizes the number of funding accounts and payments. Let's say you have 100 locations with mailing equipment. We'll go to some accounts that have 100 different postage accounts. So they're basically maintaining 100 different either bank accounts or credit cards, basically, because they're either pre-funding the account or borrowing funds. So, and it gets very difficult, and this is how fees sort of happen. And then when a postage meter closes, someone forgets to track down that money and postage gets lost. Best in class is to consolidate those into master accounts and then get one consolidated either invoice or bank account to fund, that all locations can use, where you can get statements detailing which locations took money out of the account or used the account. And then also the benefit of that is when meters get returned and they have money on them, the money goes back to the centralized account for other people to use and it doesn't get lost. You don't have to request refunds on it because the money is being sent back to the pool with full reporting and visibility on the transaction. Postage savings. So if you were to look at the postage guides from the post office, there's a guide 123, which is the main postal rate guide. It's got hundreds of pages and rate charts of things, and it's very confusing to even know where to get started on postage savings. So I'm going to break down 90% of all postage savings is from one of these core categories to make this easy for you. So first up is use postage meters or PC postage because the post office is now giving you a 5-cent savings. So 5 cents is significant. It was when it first started, it was 3 cents. It went down to half a cent of this type of savings. But now it's at its highest level of 5 cents per piece. So it's 55 cents for a stamp. If you buy it at the post office, it's 50 cents if you use a meter or PC postage. That's significant, 10%. If you can convert letters to automation classes, and this is the number one way to save money, your cost goes from 50 cents if you meter it down to 41.2 to 45.9 if you use a pre-sort service, someone who picks up your mail and commingles it with their other mailers. If you can automate that yourself with your own automation software, which prints the barcodes for you and prepares the postal forms to submit to the post office, it goes to 38.3 to 42.8. If you can convert it to marketing mail, which because it's uniform in content. In other words, it's not there's nothing personalized in it in the sense like a bill or a statement or a check is personalized, but a letter, dear John, here's a special offer, here's a newsletter is more generic. A generic piece can qualify for marketing mail automation at 25.6 to 29.1. And if you are lucky enough to be a nonprofit, you get 13.8 to 17.3 cents for your marketing mail. So you can go all the way from 55 cents to 13.8 cents based on how you prepare your mail and what type of organization you are. There's another thing that adds to that. And the biggest mailings that people do are usually statements and statement type and check mailings. Those are the largest single mailings that we find most organizations do that make up the bulk of their mail. So there was a new rule that was put into place over the past few years, and it was expanded last year to up to 3.5 ounces for the price of 1 ounce. And what that means is if, let's say, you're sending out a 3-ounce newsletter and it's 80 cents to run it through your postage meter. If you use a pre-sort service, it rates at even though it's 3 ounces, it rates at the 1 ounce rate because you're running it through an automation class. So it's only 41.2 to 45.9. If you run it through, you barcode it yourself, it's 38.3 to 42.8. So let's say the most common place for this is in invoices. So let's say you have some customers that get 1, 2, 3-page invoices, but you might have some clients that get an 8, 10, 12-page invoice. Well, if that can get folded into a 6x9 envelope, instead of it being an 80-cent piece, it's now 41 cents to it's 38 cents to 45.9 by using one of the automation classes. So it increases the value of most commonly just using a pre-sort service. But if you can automate it yourself because you've got the volume, there's extra discounts to do that. Convert priority mail from retail to commercial. So all that means is when you run a priority mail piece through your postage meter, you're creating the postage meter imprint. That's all you're printing on it. When you're doing the commercial rates, like we showed, the commercial rates basically will have that 4x6 label with the address and the barcode on them. By doing that, on average, you save 19% for priority mail, 13% for priority mail express. If you convert your first class mail parcels from retail to commercial, the same way, it's just for the lighter weights, items less than a pound, it's up to a 27% savings. If you use electronic return receipt, it's a $1.20 savings. And the other one is to compare pricing across the carriers. So you might be sending things priority mail that might be less expensive to send UPS or FedEx, or vice versa, based on is it going to a residence, is it lightweight, is it are there extra charges like delivery area surcharges that might not be factored when you factor fuel. So it's important to have some way to compare pricing across multiple carriers. Now, What you can see from all of these things is in order to get these postage savings, you need to have visibility of your spends across the enterprise. Because if you don't have the visibility, you don't know where you're doing these items and where you can save money. So it's very important to use best-in-class tools and resources to manage this category. In some cases, organizations are spending hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars in mail spends. Without the right tools to manage this, you can't take advantage of the postage savings, the equipment savings, the visibility that we talked about. So work with all the vendors' data and build some format for visibility for yourself and try to maintain this. We maintain this in a multi-vendor, multi-location web system. You need some way to manage this, whether it's, you're managing it in spreadsheets and you have like an automated, and you have like detailed spreadsheets to do this, but you need to have a system to do it. And this data needs to be updated because there are changes that happen in your portfolio, in postage spends, in fees, in lease expirations, and equipment changes. There's huge amounts of acquisitions and divestitures that happen in most organizations. And then use this data to drive savings through your portfolio. And hopefully you've seen from this, there's a lot of savings that can be gathered. The way we do it is we put it into a web dashboard that we give our clients access to, where they can see all their leases, meter rentals, fees, maintenance charges, total expenses, postage spends, and then a spend ratio for across their entire organization. And they can see it, they can see what's happening at every location, and then they can dive down to the details of specific sites to see the details of their leases, pictures of their mailing equipment. They can see everything from the postage spends. We're going to the vendors' websites every month and downloading all the postage transactions so they can see exactly how much postage they're running, what are the balances in meters, and what are the balances in accounts. We're tying it to if they're paying fees, meter maintenance contracts, all their account numbers, supplies, who did we speak to, and what's the history. This history is really important to be able to document what's happening. It's almost impossible for you to work with the mailing vendors directly, and every time the mailing vendor is working with a location, for you to get full visibility to what those conversations were and what were the steps that happened. We provide that for clients because we find it's a better way to make sure that there are controls in place to document that changes are happening. We find that we've been really successful in this, and this is the reason we think there's so much savings. Whether you do this yourself or you use a third party, we think we do it better because this is all we do. But making sure that you follow some of these processes is paramount to being able to drive savings. We've saved our clients over $50 million in this category, basically since 2012. We manage today a fleet of 134,000 pieces of mailing equipment. It's probably the largest mailing equipment fleet in the world. And our average client has saved about $1.5 million. But we're the most proud of is, regardless of the size of the client, the average savings has been 60% on the equipment side. And like we talked about, the $16 million of lost postage and vendor fees. Everyone on our team came from this industry, and with our web tools, we think we provide the only sort of one-stop shop to manage these categories. What we do for any account who might be interested is we do a no-cost analysis. And in that no-cost analysis, we will provide you the visibility that you need to show you where your spends are throughout the country. So we will basically invest that money in any potential prospect because we find it's the best way for you to see, is there a savings opportunity that you missed, to get you the detail that you need, even if you decide you want to manage it on your own. But most importantly, if we can show you a savings, that you have the tools available to be able to promote it to your organization to get the project approved. So to do that, we will physically build you that visibility that you need, and you will have full visibility to all the equipment throughout your organization. If you decide to move forward, then what we do is we submit credit requests, lost postage forms, avoidable fees. We help negotiate your contract pricing and create a catalog, and that it would also include helping you negotiate a master service agreement. But then the majority of our time is spent working with the locations, validating that they have the right equipment, right-sizing equipment, terminating things that aren't needed, and then basically full implementation of all the savings. We basically present all savings for your approval. We don't do anything without your approval. We maintain it all in the web dashboard we showed, and we provide ongoing support on this as your basically account manager. We do this because most organizations are going to have leases that expire between now and 4 years into the future, and it needs to be managed on an ongoing basis. We work with, we think, some of the largest organizations in the country, two of the in the Fortune 10, probably 15 or 20 in the Fortune 100. But you can see 8 of the top 15 banks, 3 of the top 10 insurance companies, 1 of the top 2 pharmacy chains. It doesn't really matter what industry. It just matters that you have you have an enterprise with lots of locations that have mailing spends. So, and finally, the typical way that we work with most organizations is on contingency. So if we can save you money, we would ask for a percentage of the savings. But if we don't, we're free. So we give this sort of oversight without having to be a risk. And some clients don't like that model. They like to be on fixed fee agreements, which we set up with clients. But a lot of clients really like the contingency because it's no risk for them. If we don't find any savings, we're free, and in exchange, we're doing the work and managing the category. So what did we talk about today? So we talked about the equipment savings process that you can drive to find savings, whether you do that through us or on your own. Analysis and visibility. The most important thing of this category is getting the visibility to the spend and then analyzing and maintaining this data. Choosing the right vendor and acquisition method to make sure that you have a good partner for the future. Once you have that partner, how do you pick the right solution for every location, and making sure that there's a process around that. PC postage is, like I said, the fastest growing piece of the postage market. Especially when you factor that there are a lot of field locations that just need some sort of postage disbursement but don't do huge volumes. So having PC postage can be a really easy way to account for the mail spend at all the disparate locations. Looking at all your invoices to making sure there isn't fees and overcharges. Every location pays fees and overcharges. I can say that unequivocally. Every location on this call is paying these types of fees. It's just a question of how much. Lost postage, where there are accounts that got turned in, 30% of all postage meters in the United States have been turned in since 2008, and the majority of those people have not gone back and gotten their funds. So there's money out there. Most organizations have it. It's just a question of tracking it down. Enterprise fleet management, setting up the best structure to manage your account for the future and then maintaining that. Postage savings, hopefully we showed you some different ways to reduce cost on postage that you can take advantage of, or if not else, just to validate that you're doing the best things today. And then using the best-in-class tools and resources. Do you want to build these tools and resources on your own? Is this something you want to maintain on your own? Or do you need a third party that hopefully you see has some expertise in this category? So hopefully this is your expectation for the webinar, and that we fulfilled that and got you the information that you needed. But I want to open it up to any questions.
So just a reminder, thank you, Adam. So just a reminder, if you have a question, you can either put your hand up and I will unmute you so that you can ask your question, or you can type the question in the question box and we'll do our best to answer your question today. We do have a question here. It says, did you say lost business reply mail funds go to the state unclaimed fund?
So the post office is actually the way that they manage lost funds is different. Nothing gets turned over to the state. So this is the process with the Postal Service, and I've done and actually had the Office of Inspector General do a study on this. I've been very involved in this from the forefront. So if you have a postage account, be it business reply, permanent imprint, postage due, any postage account, after 2 years of inactivity, the post office will send you a letter to the person who originally took out the permit at the address the permit was originally taken out from. If you do not respond to that letter within 30 to 60 days, the funds get moved to a different general ledger account, and the post office will never notify you again or publish the list in any database in which you can search. So the ways that we've been successful in doing that is we have certain contacts with the Postal Service that we work with to help us provide that level of visibility for our accounts, because there's nothing out there for you to be able to do it. And the post office makes it incredibly difficult for you to be able to track those funds down. But there's millions of dollars every year that go turned in as basically the post office considers income for the Postal Service. You can get it back at any time. You just have to be able to prove that you had an account there. So we work with the post office team and from your accounts payable records to find that information.
Thank you, Adam. Another question. Is it easy to start using PC postage for all my locations?
It is very easy. There's usually onboarding processes from the vendors where they can, get you set up as a group. There are webinars that are run, multiple times per week from every vendor. There's onboarding packets. We find it's usually a relatively simple thing, especially since it's web-based and there's nothing to install on computers and things like that.
Okay, and another question, how do you get visibility if you have multiple vendors?
The best way to do it, so first off, can you go to those vendors and do they have you identified as any sort of national account in which they can pull reports on? So that's the first step. The next step that we found is the most effective is to search your accounts payable records and on the core mailing vendors to make sure that you've got everybody in line with what their spend is. So go back, 1 to 5 years, depending on how far you want to go back, and look up the main mailing vendor names. And from those, request the detail of every transaction. So, what is the invoice number, invoice date, amount, any descriptions that you have, and then try to match that up to make sure that you understand what location and what vendor each one of those is from. So a lot of those will be included in the vendor reports, but there'll be exceptions to that, and those are your rogue spends that you want to go after.
Thank you. And another question, will you forward a copy of the presentation? So the copy of the presentation and today's recording will be available on our website under FAQs, as well as the link to the webinar presentation and recording will be sent to you in the post-webinar email.
Any other questions? Well, I want to thank everybody for being on the call today. I hope the information was helpful, and please let us know what we can do to help.